Hello everybody, Marty Richards with Richland Center Tourism here today with another Why Do We Call It That episode, all new just for you. So here we go. Today I am here at the corner of Mill and Park Street. Now the building behind me right now is a vacant church. The Assembly of God congregation had formerly occupied this, but now they have built a new church, a bigger, newer, better church for their congregation. So it is currently available and for sale if you're interested. But the real story here maybe isn't so much about the church itself. So to start the story, we've got to rewind all the way back to 1893 when the United Methodist Episcopal congregation decided they needed to build a church. So they did. And the building behind me, starting in 1893, was a church here in Richland Center, one of the first churches actually constructed. Now, the church and the building itself really isn't the story here. The story is more about the legend, or what's truth and what's not, about Richland Center being a quote-unquote dry town. So many folks in Wisconsin, and even I've met folks throughout the nation, when they talk about Wisconsin, it's how did Richland Center become a dry town? They still think it's a dry town. That is not true. However, for a good portion of 50 plus years or more, Richland Center was somewhat a dry town. Little known fact, unless you're a resident here, the service organizations, so the VFW, the American Legion, they did have establishments where the public could go get and wet, a drink and wet their whistle after a hard day's work. However, the real story here is all about the different periods of time where it was truly a dry town. The real story here is of how Richland Center went from being a wet town, dry town, back to a wet town, then back to a dry town, and then eventually, as today, a wet town. So it all starts in 1903. In 1903, there was a big movement for Richland Center to get rid of the ills of alcohol and to stop that nonsense and become a dry town. It was led by several different civic leaders, and one of those leaders was the pastor at that time here at this church. He gave an exceptionally rousing and aggressive sermon one Sunday, and then shortly after that, there was a dynamite charge fired off that damaged the church, had to be repaired, but later that year the vote did go through to make Richland Center a dry town. Then we move forward to Prohibition, right? So the rest of the nation joined in. There's no alcohol anywhere, supposedly. We will do an episode about the different speakeasies in Richland Center because I have witnessed that they did exist with my own eyes. And in 1933, Prohibition was revoked. And then Richland Center, lo and behold, they became a wet town again for just a few months. So about 10 months after Prohibition ended, there were a few taverns. The Central Tavern, notable, down at the corner of Court and Central Avenue, was a tavern that opened up right away. It was legal, everything was fine. But then again in 1933, Richland Center voted to become a dry town once again. And that lasted until 1986. And in 1986, the city council, and through a referendum of the city voters, the residents of the city, they did vote to finally become a wet town. So that is why, it's not really a why do we call it that episode, but it is interesting to run back through the history of Richland Center and, is it a wet town or is it a dry town? The Temperance Movement was very strong here, but ultimately by 1986, we did become a wet town. So that is the history of Richland Center and its, its dance with alcohol. That story, not really a why do we call it that, but just a good historical review of how Richland Center eventually did end up becoming a wet town. And just a note, Richland Center was not the last town to be dry in Wisconsin. There's still a small town in Door County area of Wisconsin, Ephraim, that is still a dry village. So they've still got that going for them. So for Richland Center Tourism, we hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Marty Richards. Let's everybody have a great day.